Hello everybody and welcome to the first ever video right here on the Night Owl Writing channel. Today we are going to be discussing villains. Now obviously I am not the first person to make a video about villains, and I will not be the last, and also I will not make the best video about villains because I have written two and both of them are decent. But I feel like there are some elements of villainy and of writing villains that I can talk about. For example, true evil villains. When should you use them? And when is it just kind of lazy? Let's dive in. Now, before we can dive into when to use a true evil villain, we have to talk about what a true evil villain even is. So, I like to think of it as there being two types of true evil villains. One of them is what I like to call the animalistic true evil. This is a character like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. It is a character that has no motivation because its only motivation is it's a predator animal and the main characters are the prey. These are very useful for a type of story where the villain doesn't matter all that much, and what is more important is the character dynamics as they attempt to defeat this villain. So, like Stranger Things. The Demogorgon, while it is a good villain, shows up like, 4 times. It's not really in its season very much. And it's only, the times it's there, it only advances the plot. It doesn't have any dialogue. It just kind of shows up a couple of times for a nice jump scare, or it attacks someone to advance the plot. Now, just because your villain isn't a character doesn't mean it's lazy. It's not lazy to write an animalistic true evil villain. It just means that your story is more focused on other elements, like the character dynamics and character development, relationships, things like that, and the villain is just there to facilitate that, which you can do with a villain with more backstory or with a sadistic true evil, but those other groups tend to command slightly more screen time and slightly more presence than a simple animalistic true evil. Now, on to the previously mentioned sadistic true evil. And this is a character like the Rookie's Rosalind Dyer, who is a psychopath serial killer who manipulates people to get what she wants, and also knows exactly how to get under someone's skin. The scene where she meets Lucy and sings Dream a Little Dream of Me is still one of the scariest in television history. I love that scene. It's so well done. But I also, in my current work, Mordrob, which is up on Storyforge right now, the main character, the titular character, Mordrob, is the villain, and he is a true evil psychopath that does what he wants. He's almost like Nietzschean in his philosophy. I have power, and therefore I can do whatever I want, and no one should limit my power. And he goes so far as letting someone's friend die so that he can be there to comfort her, so that he can make her fall in love with him. He's manipulative. He's cruel. He has a lot of monologues. He likes monologuing. He'll walk up and he'll immediately start talking about, like, go deep on information about a character's, like, family and about how he's gonna, like, brutally murder their kids. And it's really dark. And it is very effective for this story, as while he is the main character, he is also it's setting him up to be a main villain in a later story. So, there are interesting ways that you can write true evil villains, such as the sadistic true evil. And then there are utilitarian ways that you can write true evil villains, like animalistic, where you're just using them as a plot device and not as a character. Now, when should you use true evil, and when should you use a more morally gray, complicated villain? Really, it depends on what type of story you are writing. If the story you're writing is mostly about your main characters banding together to fight some great villain, then you don't need a particularly deep villain. They can just kind of be there to be villainous. And that's where you might not really want to write their motive. So you might just be like, yeah, they're just kind of evil for the sake of being evil, and our main characters have to stop them. Or, on the other hand, if you're trying to write a story where your main characters have to make really tough moral decisions, and there's really interesting questions asked about what's right and what's wrong, who's actually the hero here, then obviously any type of true evil villain is not going to be correct for that. You need to have a more complicated, deeper, morally gray, or at least somewhat ambiguous villain. So, just look at your story and think about a few questions. One, what is the focus of this story? Is the focus purely on, a group of good people doing good things? In which case, it might make more sense to just use a simple true evil villain. Or is your story about morally gray people doing morally gray things, and there being repercussions for their actions? And maybe the villain is just someone after the same goal, whether that's, power or riches, tablet of resurrection, I don't know. But maybe your villain is just trying to get the same thing as the hero, and they're just in the way. Then you get some really interesting questions being asked about who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. And so you can do some really interesting things with that. Then also ask yourself the question, how much page time, how much screen time does my character get? Because if it's not a lot, then maybe something like an animalistic pure evil is more interesting. Maybe then, not more interesting, but more effective. Of just, they're here, they're evil, doesn't really matter why they're here, they're just here and they're evil, and you need to stop them. But if you want to give them a lot of screen time, then you could either make them anti-heroic or morally gray, or you could make them still pure evil, but a, sadistic psychopath that has, that's like Mordrov has these monologues, is always getting under characters' skin, which can just be a really intimidating villain because it can feel like they're always, a step ahead of you. You come out to fight them, and they already know who your family is, and might already have, might already be attacking them. And that can just lead to a really intimidating villain without needing a motive. You don't need a good motive to have a good villain. That's kind of one of the main points I want to communicate with this, is that you don't have to spend all this time writing up some really interesting motive for your villain if throughout the story they're just going to be evil, and you don't really spend a lot of time on justifying them or looking into their backstory. If you world build a whole backstory to make your character more morally gray, and then just don't talk about it, everyone's just going to see them as true evil, and then just make them true evil. There's no point making someone morally gray and then not going in and actually making them morally gray. So, I'm just going to say, don't care what people out there are saying about, and will say about, villains with no backstory or no motive are boring and lazy. Just write. Just write your villain how you want to write it. And if the most effective way and the most effective character for your story is the Demogorgon, then write the Demogorgon. If it's Rosalind Dyer, then write Rosalind Dyer. Please write more Rosalind Dyers. Rosalind Dyer is one of the greatest villains in TV. She's so good at just being villainous, and that's kind of the justification I want to give, is look at Rosalind Dyer. She's not a boring villain, and she doesn't really have a good motive. She's just a psycho. So this has been, kind of windy and kind of rambly, but all this to say, true evil villains are not pointless. There are very good times that you should use a true evil villain. Stranger Things wouldn't have worked if the Demogorgon had some really interesting, complicated, morally gray backstory. It just wouldn't have landed the same. You would have had to write a bunch of things very differently. So, remember, your characters are tools, and choose the right tool for the job. And sometimes, a true evil villain is the perfect tool for your book. Hope you have a good day. Get out there and write some gosh darn pages of your gosh darn book. Come on, we all want to read it.